It was my birthday. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. Not some milestone echoing age or achievement. Just an ordinary number on the calendar that circled itself quietly. Still, she made it into an event. My wife. Always the orchestrator of details. The curator of ambience. The unseen hand behind every beautiful moment. This year, she said she wanted something special. Not loud, not over the top, just intimate. She whispered, eyes gleaming, let's do something real, acoustic, candlelight, the kind of night that lives in memory more than on camera. And I nodded. I always nodded, partly because I trusted her, but mostly because she made things beautiful in ways I could never explain. She planned everything, from the menu handwritten on textured paper to the placement of antique candle holders she'd found in some forgotten market in Prague. There was a playlist, yes, but she scrapped it. I want the music to breathe, she said, so she hired a guitarist. A live one, just one man and 6 strings. Trust me, I did. He arrived just as the sky turned to lavender. I remember watching from the kitchen window. The way his shadow stretched across our walkway. He moved like someone who had been in too many rooms he didn't belong to. But made him his anyway. He was tall, wearing a linen shirt that fluttered slightly in the spring air. On his back, his guitar, slung like a second spine. His name was Theo. She introduced us. Her hand lightly touched his arm when she spoke his name. Like she was offering him to the evening. Not just to me. He's from the creative circle, she said, too casually. Sound design, gallery installations, Berlin, you know the type. I didn't, but I smiled anyway. He smiled too. It was warm but rehearsed. The way performers smile when they know they're already welcome. He spoke softly, his words trailing like the end of a song. I barely caught the titles of his pieces. The names of cities he'd lived in. What I noticed instead was how easily she laughed at his stories. How her eyes shone not with curiosity, but recognition. She guided him to the corner near the stone fireplace. A stool waited there, framed by soft golden light from Edison bulbs strung like fallen stars above the patio. She had arranged them herself. I remembered her hands carefully tying each filament the night before while I brought her wine and watched from the doorframe. Guests arrived like tides, and soon the house was full of old friends and good intentions. Everyone commented on the mood. This feels like a film set. Someone said, so cozy, so intentional. All praises fell at her feet. And she accepted them graciously, always gesturing toward me. It's his night. But slowly, imperceptibly, it stopped feeling like mine. Theo began to play, not songs, landscapes, soundscapes, loops and refrains and open chords that seemed to stretch across conversations and slip into glasses of wine. The music was gentle but immersive, like water you didn't know you were standing in until your ankles were wet. And she listened. God, she listened with her whole body. Her breath stilled, her wineglass remained untouched. Her gaze softened in ways I hadn't seen in years. Not since the early mornings of our marriage when I used to read her Neruda in bed. I caught glimpses, small moments, the way she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her mouth slightly parted as he played, the way she whispered something to him between sets, her hand brushing his shoulder as if steadying him, not that he needed it. In the kitchen, I walked in on them, not doing anything, nothing concrete, but their proximity was poetry. She stood at the sink, laughing low, the kind of laugh you save for after midnight. He leaned nearby, not touching, but orbiting her. I felt like an audience member arriving mid-scene. Out of place. She saw me, her laugh broke like glass hitting tile. Hey, she said, voice light. Theo was just telling me about this piece he wrote in Venice. You'd love it, very abstract. Theo nodded politely and excused himself. Guitar pick twirling between his fingers. I poured myself bourbon and stared at the sink for too long. Back outside, I took my place near the firepit. People laughed, toasted, celebrated me, but their warmth didn't quite reach. It felt like watching someone else's birthday from inside a movie. She came out soon after. Cheeks flushed, smile practiced. She draped her arm over mine and kissed my cheek like punctuation. Theo played one last song. A slow piece, unnamed. He said nothing before it. Just played. And she closed her eyes and mouthed the chords. Not the words. There were none, but the chords. Like muscle memory, like longing. And that's when I knew. It was supposed to be a night about me. But somehow, I wasn't the star. I was just the spotlight operator. Watching her shine. The guests began to thin out slowly, like a tide reluctant to recede, resisting the pull of time with small talk and second drinks. A scarf forgotten, then remembered, a story half finished at the doorstep. A clumsy hug held a second too long. These were the final fragments of celebration, the tapering echoes of a night that had overstayed its magic. I stood on the edge of the patio, half in shadow, glass in hand. The wine had long since gone warm, its sweetness dulled by air and suspicion. Around me, laughter softened into murmurs, into gestures of departure. Friends filtered out in pairs, in ones, in slow, trailing farewells. Their compliments, sincere or not, brushed past me like petals from a tree already shedding. "Man, that was something else tonight," one friend said, clapping me on the back. "The music, the mood. You're lucky. She really knows how to throw a moment together." I nodded. My smile held. My words didn't. Yes, she did know how to throw a moment together. That was her art, her performance. She composed ambience the way Theo composed chords, slowly, intimately, like she wanted the room to fall in love with the silence between the sounds. Theo, he had played like a man unraveling in front of us, string by string. His music wasn't performed, it was confessed. There was no applause after his final piece, only a kind of stunned reverence, like we were all waiting for something to land that never did. His notes hovered in the air, suspended like candle smoke, and all the while, his gaze, undeniable, tethered, magnetic, kept finding her. He didn't stare, he didn't smirk, he just looked like a man trying to memorize the face of the one thing he shouldn't want. And she let him. She met those glances with quiet recognition. Not invitation, but not denial either. A silent song between them. Maybe, one I couldn't hear, but could feel vibrating through the room. I told myself I was imagining it. That I'd had too much wine. That I was reading into things because I hadn't slept well, hadn't loved well, hadn't felt seen in months. I told myself a lot of things. The band began disassembling. The drummer coiled chords without looking up, his rhythm still carrying the weight of the evening. The bassist packed his case with the solemnity of a man ending a sermon. And Theo lingered. Tuned strings that didn't need tuning. Polished wood that didn't need polish. He moved with a kind of slow urgency, like someone biding time. And then she said it. "I think I'll head up," she announced lightly, almost yawning the words. Her voice was soft, but too clear, too pronounced. All this excitement, I'm wiped. She stepped close to me, rested her hand on my forearm, delicate, performative. A kiss grazed my cheek, featherlight, like punctuation on a sentence that no longer meant anything. "You'll stay down here?" "Yeah," I murmured. "I'll clean up." Her eyes held mine a fraction too long, or not long enough. Then she turned and disappeared inside, her silhouette swallowed by the soft glow of the hallway. Her footsteps were soundless, a practiced exit. Theo looked up, almost by instinct. As she passed, his hand froze mid-motion on his strings. A second later, he pretended to adjust the mic stand. I began cleaning. There's something sobering about post-party mess. Wine glasses, lipsticked and forgotten, napkins crumpled beside empty plates. Leftover laughter staining the air like perfume. I moved slowly, methodically, as if gathering evidence. One by one, the guests vanished. I shook hands, received praise that now rang hollow. I thanked them for coming, for celebrating me, the birthday man, the centerpiece of a table set for something else entirely. Eventually, only Theo remained. He stood, slid his guitar into its case with the gentleness of a man putting a child to bed. Walked over, extended his hand. "Beautiful evening," he said, his voice low, measured. "Yeah," I replied. "You played beautifully." Our hands met. Firm grip. But his eyes betrayed the stillness. He searched my face the way a man searches the horizon before a storm breaks. Looking not for permission, but for warning. He left with nothing else. No nod, no apology, just a silence that folded in on itself like an origami confession. I remained alone. The air now carried the scent of dying candles and unopened wine. Upstairs, a light flickered on, then off, then stillness. The night was over, but the echo of it, that stayed. Not music, not memory, just a single, quiet, unshakable note of suspicion, ringing inside me like the string of a guitar no one had plucked. But somehow, still vibrated. Morning arrived not with brilliance, but with the hesitant gray of a sky unsure whether to weep or watch. It filtered in through the blinds like diluted memory, casting slats of pale indecision across the walls. The air in the room had changed, subtly, but undeniably. It felt like stepping into a scene that had already been played once. Like something sacred had been tampered with while I was sleeping. I woke alone. That wasn't rare, but today, her absence had weight. The pillow beside me still held the hollow of her sleep. A shallow dip in the cotton, whispering that she had once been there and now was not. Her scent lingered, amber and something floral. Always hard to place, like a song without a chorus. But beneath it, something colder clung to the sheets, the faint, clinical trace of displacement. I sat up slowly, feeling the stillness pulse in my temples. Not a hangover, no. My mind was painfully clear, but a discomfort deeper than the body. A stiffness in the soul, the kind that begins as doubt and blooms, imperceptibly, into dread. I moved like a man walking through a museum of his own life, careful not to touch anything for fear of learning too much. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. The blankets were folded with military precision, the corners tight, as if someone had staged the space for a stranger's arrival. Her nightstand was bare, no water glass, no earrings left in a dish, no book with a bent spine resting open, just absence masquerading as tidiness. I stepped to the window and let the dull light trace the lines of my face. Outside, the world looked unchanged. Inside, it had been redrawn. When I turned back to the bed, I saw it. At first, it didn't register. A glint, a shadow, a shape out of place, nestled in the folds of the blanket where her hip might have rested. A small, dark object, barely larger than a coin. Something about it made the hair on my arms rise. I moved toward it with a caution I didn't yet understand, as though approaching something sacred or dangerous. Maybe both. I bent down and picked it up between my fingers. A guitar pick. Black, matte, slightly warped at the edges. The kind that's been used, broken in, lived with. One side bore a faint logo, half erased by time and touch. The other side was still warm. Still warm. There are few objects in the world more harmless in appearance than a guitar pick. And yet, in that moment, it pressed into my palm like a verdict. It sat there like a weightless accusation. Guitarists don't lose picks casually. They don't lend them out like pens at a cafe. Picks are extensions of their fingers, worn and shaped by repetition, by hours alone with strings and silence. They are personal, specific, intimate, and I had seen only one guitarist last night. Theo. He had left last. I remembered the way he shook my hand, eyes too full of something unnamed. I remembered watching his silhouette retreat down the walk, guitar case slung like a burden or a prize. I remembered the silence he left behind, folded tightly like an unsent letter. So how did this piece of him end up here? In this room, on this bed? I didn't move, just stood there with the pick resting on my lifeline, pulsing like a second heartbeat. My mind flipped backward through the hours. Her early exit, the quiet way she said goodnight, the moment she leaned in and kissed me with all the tenderness of someone closing a book they no longer wished to read. And then the space beside me, empty until morning. The pick told me everything her lips hadn't. It told me where he had been. It told me who she had let in. It told me, without saying a word, that something sacred had been taken. Silently, efficiently, and without remorse. No lipstick on his collar. No strange perfume. Just this one object. But some things are heavier than they look. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed the pick on the nightstand. It lay there like an artifact in a museum of the moment everything changed. I watched it for a long time, wondering if it would disappear, hoping it might, but truth, once discovered, does not retreat, it holds its ground. Downstairs, I imagined the smell of coffee, the clinking of mugs, the domestic choreography of a morning that wanted desperately to pretend it was like any other. But it wasn't. The bed behind me was no longer our bed. It was a stage, and this pic, was the prop left behind by the lead actor when the curtain fell. I did not cry. That would come later. Or not at all. I did not scream. Screaming is for the surprised. I was not surprised. I simply sat there, hands clasped, eyes on the pic, and let the knowledge pour in like winter through a broken window. Because sometimes, betrayal doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it arrives gently, a sliver of plastic, a silent room, a guitar pick still warm with someone else's song. It began as a whisper, not from outside, but from within, a sensation, not a sound, the kind of quiet dissonance that doesn't demand attention but lingers like an unfinished note in the chest. There was no voice, no alarm, just an ache behind the ribs, soft and insistent. Doubt doesn't shout, it hums. And that morning, it was humming inside me like a wire under tension. Downstairs, the house still wore its costume of normalcy. Coffee grounds waited obediently in the filter. A clean mug sat beside the sink. The chairs around the table were slightly askew, like the ghosts of guests still lingered. But nothing moved. Not the curtains, not the clock, not the air, only the thought that something had happened beyond my sight, moved in slow spirals. I found myself walking to the console drawer without deciding to. Muscle memory guided me, but my body felt borrowed. I opened the drawer, fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm I was pretending to carry. The security system's touchscreen blinked awake. Too bright in the morning hush. I tapped the icon for recorded footage and scrolled back to the quiet hours. The camera showed what I expected. First, the guests leaving, pairs, smiles, the staggered slow dance of goodbyes. She hugged them all. I watched it in silence, as though viewing a documentary of strangers. The last of them left at 12:43 a.m. A final wave, a final laugh. The door closed behind them. Then Theo, 12:56 a.m. His silhouette moved toward the front gate. He carried his guitar case like a pilgrim leaving a shrine. I watched him shake my hand again, strangely slow, almost reverent, and vanish down the path. That should have been the end of the story. That should have been closure. But time has a way of replaying itself when something's missing. I fast-forwarded. The camera lay still for nearly an hour. The occasional flicker of night insects. A drifting shadow from a passing car. Then, precisely at 1:42 a.m., motion was detected again. The screen lit up with the shape of a man returning. Theo, same clothes, same gait, same guitar case, except now, it hung differently, more casually, like an afterthought. He wasn't cautious, he wasn't hurried, he knew where he was going. He approached the side entrance, our service gate. A rarely used door, not the front, never the front. He rang the auxiliary bell, hidden from the main street. A soft tone, no chime, no drama. Seconds passed, not many, 5, maybe 6, then the door opened. She stood there, in a robe, hair pulled back, barefoot. Her eyes didn't flicker to the camera, didn't scan the yard, didn't hesitate. She stepped aside, wordless, and he entered as though he'd never truly left. And the door closed. There were no messages from her on my phone, no notes on the counter, no explanation left in the spaces where honesty usually lives. Just this, pixels and time, shadows and movement, a scene performed for no one but the silent eye of the machine. I watched the timestamp tick forward. 1:55, 2:18, 2:46. Time passed. The door did not open. Then, at 3:09 a.m., he re-emerged, alone. He didn't look back, he didn't pause, he walked with the calm of someone satisfied. Not nervous, the kind of calm that knows there are no consequences waiting. The kind of calm that walks through another man's garden and leaves no footprints. The door stayed closed behind him. I sat in front of the screen for a long time. Not moving, not breathing properly. I didn't rewind, not yet. I didn't need to. The image was already etched into the backs of my eyes. Burned into the softest part of memory. She had let him in. She had let him in without flinching. She didn't stumble, she didn't startle. She welcomed him like the second act of a performance she had rehearsed in silence. I leaned back, my hands cold, my chest hollow. The glow of the console washed my skin in sterile light. The way morgue bulbs might illuminate a body that no longer contains surprise. The night hadn't ended when I thought it did. The birthday I believed had closed like a book on its final chapter had. In fact, continued long after I thought I'd put it away. I wasn't the narrator anymore. I was the afterthought in someone else's plot twist. I stared at the door through the camera lens. That unassuming rectangle of wood and metal. Now an altar of betrayal. She had let him in. And I had let myself believe the story had ended. But it hadn't. It had just gone quiet. And sometimes, silence is where the truth screams loudest. I did not enter the kitchen with rage. That would have been easier. Rage, after all, is loud. Rage gives you something to do with your hands. Something to raise in the air or slam against a wall. But what I carried with me wasn't fury. It was colder than that. More disciplined. It was the kind of quiet that fills interrogation rooms and funeral parlors. The kind that doesn't tremble. It listens. It watches. She stood at the sink. The morning light caught the edge of her jaw. Sharp and serene. She was pouring coffee as if the world hadn't shifted a single inch beneath our feet. She hummed something soft. Wordless, her back turned. When she finally looked up and saw me standing there, she smiled. Small, composed, practiced. I watched her for a moment. Just watched, trying to find it in her face, the crack, the tremor, the guilt. There was none, so I asked it. Why did he come back? The question landed between us like a dropped glass, no shatter. Just the heavy knowledge that something had fallen. She blinked once, set the mug down, turned toward me slowly, like she'd rehearsed this moment in her head. Prepared for it but still uncertain how it would end. There was silence. Then, finally, she said, "He forgot his capo." Her voice was steady, almost bored with itself. "His capo," I repeated, not as a question, but as a verdict. "Yes, he texted me, said he left it. It's a piece of equipment. He couldn't perform without it. You didn't tell me. It was late. I didn't want to wake you." I walked slowly to the counter. The floor didn't creak. The room didn't move. Everything stayed still, like it was holding its breath. "We just talked," she added, preemptively, like a child anticipating scolding. "It wasn't anything, not like that." My hands remained at my sides. "Just talked." "Yes, he's an artist. I'm an artist." It was artistic. I turned to her, then, really turned, looked her in the eyes. Not as a husband, not as a man, but as someone who had seen the footage. Someone who had stood inside the echo of 3:09 a.m. "Artistic." She nodded, and I saw the shift, the subtle twitch of a lie settling into the space it was meant to occupy. "Just a moment," she said softly, "of connection, nothing more." I didn't reply. I walked past her, opened the drawer beside the stove, and pulled out what I'd placed there earlier, just before the house had fully woken up. The pick. I held it between my fingers like a scalpel, like something that could open her version of the truth and see what bled. Her eyes dropped to it. No gasp, no denial, just the kind of stillness that knows it has been caught but doesn't yet know what to do with itself. I placed the pick gently on the counter between us. It made no sound when it landed. But it echoed, in her eyes, in mine. There was no need for shouting, no need for rage. Truth, in its purest form, doesn't need volume, It just needs a moment of stillness. And one object too heavy for either of us to lift again. I didn't cry. That surprised me. You imagine, in the weeks and years leading up to your life falling apart, that grief will arrive in floods. That it will break you with volume. But grief, like love, isn't always theatrical. Sometimes it shows up with no entrance music, no spotlight, just presence, heavy, constant, like weather. And that morning, it was raining inside me, though the sky beyond our windows was as dry and cloudless as any spring day. I packed in silence, not in anger, not in haste, just with intention. Every folded shirt felt like a quiet reckoning. Every item I placed into the suitcase felt like a word I no longer needed to say. There was no shouting in my head, no revenge fantasy, only the gentle, suffocating realization that something had ended long before I found the courage to name it. She watched me from the kitchen doorway. Her hands held a mug she never drank from, her robe tied too tightly at the waist. The same silence she used to greet mornings with reverence now felt like a mask. I didn't speak to her. There was nothing left for words to do. Words, after all, are only bridges if both sides are still trying to reach each other. And we were no longer on the same map. The pick still lay on the kitchen counter. A relic, a verdict, but it wasn't that made me leave. Not exactly. Betrayal, you learn, is rarely about the act. It's about the space that allowed the act to happen. I carried my suitcase to the hallway and paused beside the guitar stand. My guitar, the one I hadn't touched in months. The one I used to write songs for her on, years ago. When we believed that melody could fix anything. I lifted it gently, placed it across my lap and sat on the edge of the couch. I didn't play. There was nothing left in me that could be turned into music. But I reached into my pocket, pulled out the pick, and placed it delicately on the strings. It made no sound, but the gesture spoke in volumes. She came a little closer, but not close enough to interrupt the moment. I stood, walked the guitar back to its cradle, let it rest there, forever changed. Then, without fanfare, I zipped the suitcase closed, took one last look around the room, not searching for anything left behind, but confirming that I was truly done. She didn't stop me, maybe because she didn't know how. Maybe because some part of her had already let go before I ever picked up the suitcase. There was no letter, no parting speech, no last-minute attempt at clarity. She thought I left because I was angry. But I didn't leave out of rage. I left because I didn't recognize the song anymore. The melody we once shared had been replaced by silence. Or worse, a tune that didn't include me at all. A duet played in secret. Performed for an audience of 1.5. And I, the man who once composed lullabies out of laughter, who once filled rooms with harmonies meant only for her, I no longer heard myself in the soundtrack of our life. So I walked out, not with thunder, but with resolve. Love doesn't always end with betrayal. Sometimes it ends with clarity. And the clarity is this. Guitar sometimes. What kills love isn't betrayal. It's the ease with which betrayal wears the mask of art.